Hey, hello, everyone. This is another episode of Fire, Breathe, and Rob. Please like, subscribe, and also share our videos. And also, if you're listening on the internet or online or even on the radio, whatever you're streaming on, we greatly appreciate it. I'm going to introduce Chris Cause. I've met him once, and he seemed like a great guy. We talked for about 25, 30 minutes in the time we met about all kinds of things, politics. And Chris is running as a Democratic candidate for the House District 39. It's in Polk County. And Chris, you can get a little bit more into the nits and crannies of the full district.
No, thank you
Chris.
so much for having me, Rob. It was great to see you again right here. This is as interactive as we can get these days. But District 39 it's a real diverse kind of area. In a lot of ways, it's been gerrymandered, but in a lot of ways, it's a great cross section of how Florida really is. You've got all kinds of population centers with Celebration, Davenport, Champions Gate. You go a little bit farther down, and now you're getting into a little bit more of a rural area. You're getting into Polk City. Auburndale is growing all the time. So it includes, it kind of has this big, wide swath cutting around different areas. So it's got a lot of rural areas, but it still has a lot of traffic going up and down I-4 as it cuts right through the middle of it.
Right. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about you from the start?
Sure. I am a father. I am a teacher. My parents were both teachers, so eventually I went into the family business. And I don't teach at a regular middle school. I don't teach at a regular high school. I'm a social studies teacher at a juvenile detention facility. So I am at the Polk County Sheriff's Regional Detention Center inside the Bartow Jail. So it's right there in the Polk Central Jail. And I'll see anywhere from 6th grade to 12th grade, between history, world history, U.S. history, civics, government, economics. But the kids that we see there are about 2/3 of them are there less than 21 days. And then some of the other kids are there for a more serious charge. So they're waiting adjudication. And so we have them for a longer stay. So we're working with a lot of these kids to try and get them back on grade level. A lot of the kids have not actually been going to school. So we're trying to get them back into the swing of things, back into seeing just a different path, a different way of doing some of these things. Like I said, I eventually went into the family business. For a lot of these kids, they had somebody go to jail in their family or some friends and neighbors, and they just think that's what you do. And I'll tell them a story. I'll say, do you want to know the first time I went to jail? They're like, you went to jail, Mr. Cause? Yeah, when I interviewed for this job, because you don't have to go to jail. But, I've thought a lot over this kind of pandemic quarantine about normal, about what everybody's normal is. And I used to always think about the adage, you never know what's going on in another person's life. And you kind of blow that up just a little bit farther. And what's normal to one person as they grow up is what they're used to. It's what their normal is. And you often have to meet people where their normal is and not exactly, what yours might be.
How, as you said, you are a first-time candidate. What made you want to run for Florida House District 39?
I don't think enough working class people are represented in Tallahassee. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I got into teaching after the 2016 presidential election. I was sitting there with my son, and we were coloring our electoral map in the same way I did way back, when Michael Dukakis was running. I mean, my political science goes way back, right?
Right.
And I'm coloring in the map, and we get to Florida, and it's not looking great. And once they called Florida, I said, "Okay, Zach, you got to go to bed. Dad's going to say some words." And once he was asleep and the election got called, and I was like, I apologized to him. I didn't feel as though I had done enough to truly change my community or do enough to keep us out of this situation. So that's when I started to go into teaching. I started to really kind of look down that path. And as we got into closer to the 2018 election, I said, I can't believe that Rick Scott is ahead of Bill Nelson. And so that's when I got involved with the Democratic Party in Polk. And as we get here, there was a story in the Orlando Sentinel last year that said 40% of all Florida legislators are millionaires. 40%. You know, that the average net worth for a legislator, for a House legislator, is like 1.7, and in the state Senate, it's like 5.4 million. If you don't know what the price of milk is, if you don't know what it's like to be able to decide, to have to decide, I've got this bill to pay versus this bill to pay, which one, when am I going to get paid next? And that's outside of a pandemic. And now we're seeing here in the middle of a pandemic, so many people have to decide what bill is going to get paid. When am I ever going to get through on the unemployment website? You know, all of these other problems that come through. When is my stimulus check? Wait, I only got the $1,200. I didn't get the child credit. You know, all of these different things. If you are not represented by people who understand that, they are not going to have that appreciation for it. And I don't think, I just don't think that is represented at all. There might be a couple former teachers that are there, but there are certainly no current teachers that are there.
And I thought you were actually going to get into like 40 to 50% of not just Florida, but the whole nation can't afford a $500 emergency. And that's a national problem. So yeah, but I agree.
It's true. I mean, you know, so many people want to talk about, the tax cuts that happened through the Trump administration, and be like, yeah, but look at your 401k. Okay, for how many people truly have their 401k? How many people, like you said, with the $500, if a $500 expense comes up, they're not going to be able to cover that, and they're worried about the 501k or 401k. Excuse me. Yeah. Or I'm mixing my 500, my 400.
I agree. Anyway, so let's talk about this. When you were on the campaign trail, shaking hands, and I'm sure you still talk to voters, even though you're not able to go out and shake hands and talk. When you are talking to those voters, Chris, what are the main issues that come up with when you're hearing from voters?
I went through it's so funny that you talk about that. That was some of the best time when I was just knocking doors by myself trying to get signatures. And I would ask people, I said, what's your number one issue? If you know all the issues that are in the world, what number one? And where I would go through Auburndale, and they would talk about traffic. And I would go through Celebration, and they would talk about traffic. And when I would go through Davenport, and they would talk about traffic. And what ends up being 2 months ago, the number one issue is probably going to change to what it might be today. But one of the main reasons that I was getting into this race too is the idea that we're losing countless hours just sitting on I-4, sitting on there, and it just feels like nobody cares. And there are so many people that are out there in this exact same situation. Traffic doesn't care what party you vote on. They don't care whether or not you're on the blue team or you're on the red team. Traffic is just always there. And we're the fastest growing area in Florida and the fourth fastest in the country. And it just feels like there's no attention to that. And I mean, to a man, when you go to the door to door to door, people would talk about traffic, and they just want somebody to care about it.
Start at Davenport. If you're in the Davenport area, you go through Champions Gate. I mean, it's like a zoo now. I mean, it used to not even be that much built up, but now they built all these apartment complexes. And to try to get on the highway in Champions Gate to I-4 in the morning, it's like you can't even do it. You'll be like on there waiting for about 40, 50 minutes, like you said. And then you look at 27, as you said, that 27 goes all the way down to Miami, but regardless, in this area, sometimes it's a disaster. So what are your ideas to help congestion in places like Champions Gate, as we just spoke about, and on 27, which leads
to... It's a couple of different, again, there's no silver bullet for any of these kinds of things here. They're supposed to move in a diamond exchange into the Davenport Champions Gate area. That old country exit that was just never designed to have that level of growth in it just did not have the infrastructure built up as all of the different, construction happened over the last 10 years. So that construction for this diamond exchange is supposed to happen at the end of this year. I don't know whether or not anything is going to influence that. It's a shame when we had less cars on the road over the last month that they didn't just start putting it right. It was just bulldoze it right now and start doing it. It's a really innovative idea that's worked in, I want to say Sarasota, another area of Tampa, where it's bizarre. I actually have got to update and put it on my website, but you can go to the Florida Department of Transportation. You can see an animation where you're actually normally, you have your two lanes like that. and you have all these different choke points where you'd have to wait for a traffic light to stop you. What a diamond exchange would actually twist them. And so you're on the right, you'd actually be going on the left-hand lane. That way, if you want to get on the highway, you go off that side of it. And the same thing with the other side. And so you end up moving 10 choke points down to 2. And so it's really fascinating. It's really innovative. Those are the kinds of solutions that we need to have. You know, right now, the beyond the ultimate is what the extension of I-4, once they're done with the I-4 in downtown and it's going to move south, the I-4 beyond the ultimate is supposed to be the project. Now, that hasn't been funded yet. It's never mind started running more construction. But that's supposed to just add a toll lane like they have in Miami, and they have some, you know, that's what's going to be downtown Orlando. And then it gets so much worse than that. It's actually not just going to be a toll lane. It's going to be a dynamic toll lane, which means that the busier it gets, the more the toll is.
Wow. That's disaster.
I mean, you end up having what could be, you know, down in Miami, they have a 7-mile stretch that can cost you $10. And so when, again, if you're rich, that's why they call them Lexus lanes down there. I was going to call them a let them eat cake lane, because you're supposed to be able to just drive by them and be like, I have more money than you. Okay, bye. I mean, that isn't how, you know, a society should best benefit. These are supposed to be public roads that are going there. And I would love to see other solutions for that toll lane, whether or not it becomes a high occupancy vehicle lane, whether or not it becomes, maybe that's where trucks go. You know, we have so many different warehouses right around in Davenport that they end up slowing down traffic so much. What are other kind of innovative ways to do that? I mean, in my ideal society, we would be expanding high-speed rail, and we would, I mean, I would love to see a subway system that comes. Imagine a subway system in Orlando that could get as far down as Disney. You'd be able to have workers that can go everywhere. You'd be able to have residents that be able to move back and forth. You'd be able to just hop on the train, go downtown, and go hang out, go to a Magic game, go down and see Orlando City Soccer, and not be confined to the parking, to the parking lot that I-4 has become. Yeah. We need to be able to grow up from an infrastructure standpoint. You know, again, maybe I'm naive, maybe it's optimistic, but I truly believe in the first 3 words of the Constitution. It's we the people. Yeah. And we shouldn't always sit back and be like, Tallahassee's going to do what they want to do. Washington is just going to do. You know what? We the people get an opportunity to say that every November. We have an opportunity to be able to say, you know what? I want different ideas. I want to be able to send this guy there, that woman there, whatever it might be. We have that opportunity, and I don't think we take advantage of it nearly enough.
But I want to talk about this, Chris, the development aspect. I think we need to slow down development, especially we look at the pandemic, Chris. You know, a lot of people lost their jobs right now. Who knows if some of those jobs are even going to come back? If they're with these big corporations, they could cut out a lot of these jobs. With that said, Chris, you know, we have all these houses being built on 27, and there's so much development, and I'm all for development. It's good for the economy, but you know what? There's a point where you look at California, you look at even South Florida, Palm Beach County, and Broward. Stuff is so developed that builds into the traffic. And not only that, we look at the environmental problems of the development. Where are all these houses going to get all the water? You know, what if we're in a drought? Talk about clean water. So everything goes together. So what are your issues as far as that? Do you believe that there's too much development, Chris? And how can we correct this?
I don't think that there was enough foresight in planning. I think that's really what it comes down to. Right now, we saw when the market collapsed in 2007, 2008, we're looking at that time. It was like, how do we get the construction industry back? Everything collapsed. Nobody wants to buy houses anymore. So there were a lot of permits that were drawn up right around that time, right before the collapse, that over time, they just started to get pulled again as construction moved up and moved. So that's where you end up having these monstrosities of apartment buildings and different housing developments that all of a sudden just start springing up and springing up and springing up. But you don't have the infrastructure that goes along with it because they wanted to encourage having construction come back. So a lot of the impact fees had been scaled back. So it makes it an even, as an incentive to try and bring construction back in. One of the simplest things you can do is put those impact fees back in. It's going to slow down construction, but it's also going to, that's where that money for infrastructure comes from. If you're saying to this business, that apartment complex, this housing development, that you've got to contribute to the roads, to the streetlights, to the schools that get built in this area, because ultimately you build a house, somebody moves there, then they each have jobs, they each have 2 cars, they've got to go to that job. Eventually they're going to get married if they're not already married. They're going to have kids. Those kids are going to grow up. They've got to go to school. And if you're not projecting out 20 years and say, we need to have more schools, you're not controlling the problems, right? You're dealing with what's happening right now, and you're not looking 20 years ahead. Right now in Davenport, specifically in that area, they're going to build a high school that's going to be at capacity immediately. Wow. That's supposed to open this fall. It's on the campus of the Davenport School for the Arts. And they know that that's going to be at capacity right away. And they already are starting to plan for the next school that they're going to build, because they have to find where the land is, where they're going to put that next school. Otherwise, it's going to be surrounded by another Wendy's, another, another car wash, another whatever is going to be there, another apartment complex. And you're not going to have the land to put a school, which is what we desperately are going to need. And so you end up not really, I think a lot of it comes down to that area is seeing such great growth because it's such a great place to live. You end up you're right in the middle of being able to go down to Tampa, being able to go to Orlando. You can work at Disney, you can work at Universal, you can get a whole lot more house than you might otherwise in Dr. Phillips and Windermere and some of the other areas, Hunters Creek anymore. So you can get a lot more hosts for that area, but you're not seeing that area being supported, because if it's still in that Polk, the line where you're looking at, that Ronald Reagan, Osceola Polk line road up 27, that's the line. And the county commissioners that deal with a lot of that are centered in Bartow. The amount of time that they spend up in the north part, Polk is enormous. Polk is bigger than Rhode Island. And Rhode Island.
That's right.
Polk is bigger than Rhode Island. Right. So you end up having guys that are down in Bartow who aren't spending enough time up in the top part of the county to be able to weigh the same kinds of needs. If you're just going by cows in a farming area, in Bartow, in Eagle Lake, in Winter Haven, in Auburndale, something like that, you don't necessarily get tapped into the more urban, for lack of a better term, problems that we're having in the Davenport Champions Gate area.
How do we fix that then? Just better elected officials, I guess, in this area?
Well, first of all, that's always a fix. I think putting the impact fees back in, you end up having, from what you said about elected officials, the more money that you have in politics, the more money that comes in from a construction bureau, from right. Where's the lobbying firm that handles, I sit in traffic for an hour and 15 minutes on my way home from work every day. Where, I don't know that lobbying group. And right. So the construction lobby is going to be a lot stronger than somebody like that. And so, they can handle a bunch of phone calls from people who are like, I'm sitting in my car all day, get me out of here, versus, somebody who's putting thousands of dollars in your election coffer.
I agree. We need to get money out.
I wish it was, I wish the answer wasn't always there's too much money in politics, but there's too much money in politics.
We got to get it out.
I would say being able to put those impact fees back in, being able to, talking about from a school standpoint, there's different ways that they could put, a half cent. In Polk, we voted to have a full cent put in there to try and put more school infrastructure in, repair schools, build schools. If we had a little bit more of that, that ends up being kind of an electorate problem too, where you're seeing if people retire here, they don't have their kids that go to school here, so they might not see the immediate impact of it. The problem is businesses should want better schools. They should want better schools for their employees, because then they want to live there. The more, the better the schools, the better the property values, the better employee you're going to get at your business. It really is a much better cycle. But I think far too often you see the short-sighted, I don't want my taxes to go up in just this little tiny bit.
Agreed, 100%. I believe during a pandemic, Chris, this shows that we need Medicare for all in this country. People are worried about, they lost their jobs. They don't have any health care. If they had a job that gave them health care, they don't have health care. So many uninsured in this state, all around the country. People aren't going to the doctors because they're worried about the bill. Do you believe that also, that we need Medicare for all in the time of a pandemic like this?
I believe that we need Medicare for all outside of a pandemic. But right now it shines a light on the idea that we are only as healthy as a society as our most vulnerable. It doesn't matter where that vulnerability is coming from. If somebody is afraid to go to the doctor because they might be sick, it makes all of us unhealthy. I truly believe that that healthcare is a right.
Yes.
And it should not be tied to your job. But I'm not so, I understand from a pragmatic standpoint that we can't snap our fingers and have Medicare for all. If we need to have some kind of intermediate step, like whether or not it's a public option or whatever that might be, I'm all for that too. The more people that can be covered faster, the better. If we can expand Medicaid here in the state of Florida as a part of the Affordable Care Act, we're going to cover 500,000 people. If we end up having over 500,000 more people covered in the state of Florida, we're going to have a healthier Florida. It's just that simple. And that's money that's coming from the federal government, that again, over time gets matched and with the state, and, those formulas move over time. But we would have a healthier society. How much better off would we be overall if we didn't have that? We want to compare. You'll see a lot of these protesters are talking about opening up the country, the state. Sweden has done it right. Sweden didn't shut down at all. Well, Sweden also has national health care. Every other industrialized country in the world has national health care. North Korea, Cuba have national health care. Right. And not that we need to emulate. I know, I could see the comment. I could see the comment being typed right here on YouTube right now. We shouldn't be looking at the rest of the world and saying, no, we're doing it right. All the rest of you are doing it wrong. We need to be able to insure our people and take that burden off of, frankly, it's taking a burden off of employers as well. Taking the burden off of employees to stay at a job that may not best fit them anymore just because it has insurance. I don't think it's ever fully been, argued. The idea that if you pay $500 a month for your insurance and you take that away, but you replace it by having your taxes go up $300 to cover national health care, you just made $200, and you're not going to have to pay anything else along the way when it comes to deductibles and copays and prescription drugs. I've never understood how employers wouldn't want that too. They constantly are citing, healthcare as one of the biggest burdens that's on there. Yeah. You take that part out, and we're dealing with a lot. But I understand that people are afraid of having the national government. Oh, good, something else that they're bad at. You're like, well, maybe we could make it better. We should always want things to be better.
I want to talk about this, Chris. You talked about being a teacher in the prison system. I think this needs to be talked about. We don't see this talked about in many campaigns, especially in state campaigns in Florida. Can you talk about working in the prison, about prison reform? We see so many private prisons popping up, and these politicians getting tons and tons of cash from private prisons, and also working with these kids. Can we talk about police brutality and police issues and how we can kind of stop that from happening? So those two questions would be great.
I think in Florida, there are only 6 private prisons. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not something that, don't get me wrong, for the people who are inside those 6 prisons, it impacts them in the same way. Again, it's right there in the definition. A private prison, their job is to make sure that they're fully stocked. They want to have as many people in there. And so that provides way different incentives for, being tough on crime than we probably need. What I can speak to specifically, I'm in a county facility. The sheriffs, the deputies that I work with, have the kids' best interests in mind. They do. In addition to making sure that everybody is staying safe. What I think we have a much bigger problem with is a lot of the kids that I work with see that as just a natural progression. And it comes from, in a typical school, you might have 5% of a classroom that would be ESC, that's designated, exceptional student, under that designation. About a month before we were kind of going into quarantine, I went through and I added all the kids that we had and figured out what that percentage was. I have 58%. And so you're seeing a clear tie between kids who have behavioral issues in schools, and in schools eventually getting to a point where they don't know how to handle the most extreme cases. Yeah. And so we do what we do with most of our society and just put them in prison. It's because we don't know what to do with a segment of society. And we're not really in the rehabilitation business. We're in the go put them away because I don't know what else to do with them business. And I think we need to be able to invest in a lot more programs inside the prison system that are designed to rehabilitate people. One of the worst parts of my day is when I leave and I see that the kids are just going to sit there. They're all just sitting amongst each other. They're doing nothing. There's no band, there's no after school program. They might be able to, play football or throw the ball around outside in the small area, but it's not the same level of like after school, or you could, teach some kind of trade or something like that, because that's what these kids need. They need something else, some other pathway. And I don't think we do enough to really highlight that path. And I think that those kinds of programs, even if it would be some other kind of, charter schools can be very effective. They can. When they could serve a need that might be outside what the public school system can address. This would be one of those kinds of needs. When you're having students that are getting suspended after suspension because they mouth off to a teacher, and don't get me wrong, I got plenty of kids who mouth off to me. It's not like I don't know what that feels like. But you eventually get to a point where you're saying that I can't let this kid in the classroom because he disrupts the class for everybody else, and we can't actually get any teaching in here. If you had charter schools that were designed for students that were like that had different people with different training, different degrees, but that the whole school was designed around that's going to be a very effective charter school model that could break that school to prison pipeline that we're concerned with. Otherwise, you're just going to see those same kids that go into that 58% that are going to eventually just change uniforms from the color that they wear with me to the color that you wear as an adult.
Have you got to quite a few kids, do you feel like, when teaching, like, changed a lot of these kids' lives? Do you feel like that?
I can only hope. I'll get so disheartened when I'll see a kid who I think has turned it, and then he comes back. Once these kids, they have no idea once they get into the system how much more difficult it is to stay out. That's another problem. Recidivism is a huge problem that we deal with. You're seeing kids that say, I didn't know that I had a court date. And if it gets sent by email and they don't have internet access, or they don't have a computer, or they don't have their phone, the phone gets turned off. They move for whatever reason. It goes to mom's house when you're living at dad's house, or some other family member. There's all sorts of problems. And as soon as you've missed that court date, you've violated your probation, you're coming right back. And so I can definitely say, yes, I have. Is it enough? No.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's the most difficult aspect of my job, is that I want so badly for them to understand that there is another path. I'll explain all the time the difference between, I'll put up on the board, I'll put 24,000 and I'll put 36,000. And I'll ask them, what's the difference between those two? And more often than not, they don't know it's 12,000, but The difference is that's your average salary with a high school diploma and without a high school diploma. And I'm trying to just, you try and go with just the smaller steps to be like, look, I know you might not like this teacher. You might not like doing this work. You hate math, whatever it might be. Just do it enough to be able to get that high school diploma. And now we can start talking about something else, because the difference is $1,000 a month. And sometimes somebody wants to argue, be like, nuh-uh, this rap star makes blah, 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 and he didn't finish. And you're like, yeah, I know there's the one, but this is why this is an average, and that's why it matters. And you try every different avenue. And so many of my other fellow teachers, we try and reach them in lots of different ways to be able to try and show them that there's this different path.
How can we solve a lot of these problems that are in our education system? We do know, as you said, a lot of it is funding, but besides that?
Well, I am finishing up my 3rd year as a teacher. And with this program that the year of the teacher and the raises, if they do stick, I mean, I was on a town hall recently with Representative Carlos Guillermo Smith, who was saying that he truly believes, even in the specialist session, that these teacher raises will stick. So that's a good thing. That is a good thing. We'll see, but it's a good thing. I will see a raise. Now, it's not going to be the 47.5, because each district is kind of left to try and raise those minimum salaries up to what they can based on where they are. And you end up having a place, like Miami-Dade or Broward, where they're already paying that, and they're not going to see the same kind of increase because, that they have to be competitive in that area, and that's what their salaries already are. But it's not fair to somebody who has been there 10 years, 15 years, 25 years. It would take 14 years in the Polk County School District system for me to make 47.5 in the current system. 14 years. So that means everybody from just starting all the way to 14 years of experience in a classroom would be making essentially the same thing. And that's kind of a slap in the face to teachers who have been there up to those 14 years. And never mind, you get into somebody who's like 15, 18 years, who are like, oh, great, you're going to make $1,000, less than I am, something like that. One place where we could talk about a whole lot of that money is the amount of public school dollars that go to private schools in the choice program. I don't understand, and I cannot have anybody explain it to me, why nobody is getting in anybody's way. If you want to go to a private school, you want to go, off you go. Nobody is stopping you. But if you keep taking money away from public schools, then they are not going to be as successful. And you need to have charter schools and private schools playing by the same rules as public schools at the very least. Mm-hmm. And some of the discrimination that is allowed at these private schools is beyond the pale. So, some of the schools, look, if you want that choice money, you've got to play by the same rules. And if we could at least start with that, and maybe there'll be some private schools that don't want to do that, and then some of that money can come back. I think another place where we'd be able to raise a lot more teacher salary is the compact that we have between the Seminole tribe. That just expired last year. That's $350 million at least. And we're not even getting into the prospect of having sports betting that would easily be tied into the Seminole compact. And that could be a whole lot more money. That might be another $100, $120, $150 million we're putting in there. I mean, we as a state pat ourselves on the back to say that the state lottery, is supposed to pay for education. Not really. All the money that they were putting into education just gets $1 out on the lottery money that comes in. So, there are a lot of other programs that we could be putting in that if we want to pat ourselves on the back in the same way, those are places where we could fund education.
With the first bill that you sponsor, what would it be?
The answer I would have given you 2 months ago would have been to make sure that I-4 the ultimate is funded, and we start contributing to from the traffic standpoint. Right now, I might give you a different answer that says that the unemployment, website needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt. But by the time we get into session in 2021, it's going to be next March. you know, we have to see the effects of this pandemic. We might not know for the rest of this year in this state. And so the answer that I could give you today is going to be different than the one that's going to be 2 months ago. That's going to probably be 2 months from now. To be able to cover more people in healthcare, to be able to fully fund education, to be able to, you know, rework this unemployment website, to talk about traffic, those would be a lot of the priorities that I would have. Or it might be something else that we see. If we see that the needs of District 39, the needs of the citizens of Florida might present themselves with something very different come next session. But, you know, it's a fascinating thing to think about, because my list, it's amazing how it would change. In 2 months, that I would absolutely give you that as 100%. As soon as I get in there day one, that's what I'm filing. And look what that changes in 2 months.
Well, there's so many things that we need to do in the state, so it could be a huge list.
I mean, it really is. You look at thing after thing after thing, and we're not even getting into some of the other things that I want to talk about. I don't think we should have guns in schools. You know, I want to, you know, we're looking at a whole list of things in the environment that need to be changed and scaled back from a, you know, development standpoint. We're you know, it's countless. Affordable housing is a huge issue here in this state, particularly in Central Florida, that's not being addressed. We're going on and on and on. But, you know, maybe there's something else that, you know, if people start losing their houses, you know, and we end up having, maybe we need something else that comes in, you know, and then affordable housing will move in, and we talk about, you know, that as a much more pressing issue.
Right. Well, Chris, thanks so much. Chris Cause, State House District 39. Let's get him in office. It's in November. That's when he's running, but let's help him out before then. If you can donate, also help him in any sort of way. Are you doing text banking and phone calls still? I assume.
am indeed. You can check out the website, chriscause.com. We're still collecting petitions. I suppose there's an outside chance we could get a flood of them, and then we could save that petition fee. But here in May, it's really going to be driving to get that petition fee raised.
Chris, thanks so much for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.